right, good evening, everyone. I'll go ahead and get started. I mean, what's with the shorter shelf life? If you're a veterinarian like me, if you're a practice manager, a veterinary technician, anybody that works in small animal or large animal clinics, you've probably noticed that things have changed with our compounding drugs. And tonight, I'm so excited to be here representing Wedgwood and talking about a topic that we're really, all being faced with every day now. If you're not aware, I'm Dr. Ernie Ward. I've been a veterinarian now for over 30 years. I've done a lot of different things. I've owned clinics. I've started all types of companies, technology, food. I mean, you name it, I've probably dibble-dabbled in over the years. I also am proud to serve on the Wedgwood Advisory Board. It's a group of veterinarians from all over the country that really come together and discuss these topics and how Wedgwood can help us in the trenches, so to speak. But tonight, the real star of the show is going to be Anthony Grzib, and he is a pharmacist at Wedgwood, and he's really in charge of a lot of the quality control and really is sort of behind a lot of the compounding that we receive in the clinic. So I just can't thank Anthony enough for being here tonight, because we've got a lot of tough questions. But again, he's from Rutgers University, as his doctorate in pharmacy. Again, he's involved with several boards and so forth. But Anthony, tonight, I want to just briefly go over some of the basics, to bring people up to speed, because there's been a lot of changes the last 18 months or so. And certainly Wedgwood, we've done a lot of sort of trying to get that message out. But I'd like to start off tonight with the organization that really impacts this issue the most, and that is the United States Pharmacopoeia. Could you just briefly tell us what the USP is and why vets should know about it?
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Ward, and thank you all for joining tonight. USP is really an independent nonprofit organization that was created a little over 100 years ago. And its purpose originally was to establish the quality standards for medications. And over the years has evolved and really, swallowed up more and more responsibility in establishing quality standards. To the point now today, they have quality standards not just for chemicals and finished medications, but also for the various processes that are used to analyze those materials, various processes used to prepare those medications or manufacture those medications. And so what they have, I would say for the better part of 25 years, they have had standards in place for compounding. These are quality standards for best practices for compounding pharmacies to follow when they're making medications. USP standards are just what they are. They're standards, right? They are not officially regulations. They are not, statutes or laws. But nearly every state has adopted USP standards into their board of pharmacy requirements for, again, pharmacies to follow.
Yeah. And guys, again, in the veterinary world, you're probably familiar with AAFCO, right? AAFCO creates all of these model acts for states to look at for pet nutrition, pet food, and all that sort of thing. They don't have any legal standings. They can't enforce anything, but these states then adopt it in their legislation. I think that's a good analogy. I mean, obviously there's some differences there. One of the biggest things that you're probably aware of is the fact that the FDA has now really gotten involved with this. In fact, they're actually, changing up the way these standards are going to be deployed in pet food. And the same thing is happening, of course, in really pharmacy for sure. Now, Anthony, some big changes happened at the end of last year, and we were already talking about some other changes with GFI, but bring us up to speed on these USP 795 and 797.
Sure. I mean, 795 and 797, those are the two chapters that USP has to establish the standards for compounding. So chapter 795 relates to compounding standards for preparing non-sterile compounds. 797 is the standards for sterile compounds. And I would say since at least 2013, there's a compounding expert committee at USP. They have been working on making revisions to the USP standards. And it wasn't until November of last year that those updated standards went into effect, meaning that again, USP says officially this is the standards that everyone should follow, and then we saw states immediately starting to adopt, those as requirements. And there's a lot of good, I think, updates in those two chapters. But the thing that has the biggest impact, and we're here to talk about tonight, are the changes to the Beyond Use states assigned to compounds.
Yeah, we've got a lot to talk about with that.
Yeah, and a Beyond Use state is really, it's It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar to an expiration date you would see on a medication. So it's the, again, it's what it sounds like. It's the date beyond which you really should not be using that compounded medication.
Right. And again, guys, as a veterinarian, really, I've had it explained to me in a multitude of ways, but, expiration date is kind of when the drug is ineffective, if you will. Beyond use dates, that's where we have some legal culpability. So they basically put these dates that sort of correspond, but not always. And we're going to show some examples where, the science is very much in question, in my opinion, and a lot of other folks, including, I think, Anthony, where suddenly the beyond use dates now is very different than what we've demonstrated or proven scientifically. So let's just go into a little bit more detail. I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide, but this is talking about 795 for non-sterile compounding medications. Anthony, walk us through this chart.
Yeah, so the updated chapters, when it went into effect in November of 2023, outlined the basically a matrix on how a compounder should be assigning a beyond use date or a maximum beyond use date to their compounded preparations. And I say it's a matrix because the maximum date that a compounder can assign is really dependent on a number of factors. On the non-sterile side, there aren't too many factors. It's really based on the type of dosage form it is, whether the product contains water or does not contain water. And then there is an allowance for the compounder to perform stability studies to extend the beyond use date beyond those that are prescribed in USP, but up to a maximum of 180 days.
Yeah. So again, some of this stuff was arbitrary. I'm going to be honest. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Now, the other part, the 797, has to do with sterile compounding preparation. So walk us through this one.
Yeah, on the sterile side, it gets a lot more complicated.
Right.
The matrix becomes much more complex. It depends on the type of your starting components, whether they're pure API or they're coming from a manufactured item. It depends on your sterilization method. It depends on your storage method, whether you're storing at room temperature, refrigerated, or frozen. And then after all of that is done, there's a kind of another set of matrix that if you perform stability studies, you can, again, extend the beyond use dates a little bit longer. But here, I think, is the area, as Dr. Ward alluded to, where there's kind of the least amount of what feels like scientific rationale for the standard. I mean, if you're performing a stability study on a product and you show that it's stable for 180, 270 days, it doesn't seem to matter to USP, or at least to these standards. You're maxed out at, again, it's a different matrix, but anywhere between 60 and 180 days. So it's oversimplified for me to say it's complicated, but it's a very complicated matrix that compounders have to kind of navigate through to figure out both the maximum BUD that they can assign and ultimately, the best product they can produce. You certainly don't want to sterilize something through a method that will achieve the longest BUD according to USP, but may have other implications, or certain things you really don't want to be stored refrigerated or frozen just because of how they're used, but that will achieve the longest BUD. So there's a lot of trade-offs that have to occur at the compounding pharmacy to really figure out and come up with the ideal BUD for a sterilized.
Right. And guys, if you didn't last year, prior to the 795 and 797 changes from USP, Wedgwood, and I participated in a lot of these, we had some very in-depth discussions on, the particulars of this stuff. And I would encourage you to go back and look at some of those materials and videos and webinars that we produced, last year. But Anthony, I know I just want to jump on this question right away. Why were these changes implemented? Do you have just a succinct answer you can give us? I mean, was there a problem? Were they finding that these drugs were, somehow corrupted and adulterated and harmful? Why did this change happen?
That's kind of a good question. I can give you my perspective. Again, the committee started working on revisions to the chapter in 2012, 2013, which was immediately following the meningitis outbreak caused by contaminated sterile products from a single pharmacy. And, it appeared that there was concern about, performing sterile compounding, the quality standards and that sort of thing. Ultimately, when you layer that event and kind of the reaction to that event with some of the legislation that went through, which created a whole nother category of drug producers called outsourcing facilities, which I know we're going to get to in a little bit. I think the USP committee was trying to figure out, not really scientifically, but trying to figure out from a volume perspective, how how do they control the volume of a pharmacy? How do they control the amount of stuff a pharmacy is making before that pharmacy should become an outsourcing facility? So that's my take on it, and that's why a lot of the dating, the maximum dating you're seeing is somewhat arbitrary.
Right. Yeah. And again, guys, as veterinarians, we're caught in this, right? I mean, there's a lot of forces at play here. And in the end, I think, it was well intentioned, but it probably didn't help us the way they thought it would be. So there's a lot of drugs that we're using, commonly using from compounding pharmacists that are affected. Anthony, kind of give us some of these highlight drugs. And again, if you have specific questions about drugs that you utilize a lot and you're seeing these changes, definitely put them in the chat and we can always get to you later. But Anthony, walk us through some of those big drugs that we're seeing problems or changes with.
Yeah, I mean, something like sildenafil tablets. The prior BED was typically 360 days, and just to clarify, I mean, these weren't made up beyond use dates either by pharmacies. I mean, the pharmacists were using their knowledge and understanding of the chemicals involved, their stability, what we call degradation. In some cases, they did some level of testing, potency testing over time to understand and really assign an appropriate BUD. But prior, these products were assigned a 360-day, almost a year beyond use date. Under the new USP, requirements, the maximum we can give a tablet like that is 180 days. If you look at something like a suspension, like methimazole, oral aqueous oral suspension, again, based on our knowledge and understanding and some data that we had on the product, we can give it 180-day beyond use date. Now we're limited to 14 to 35 days off the bat. Now, if we perform a stability study on that product, we can go back to the 180 days. And if we want to put that into a different base instead of an aqueous base, if we want to put it into like a non-aqueous, like an oil base, then we can give it 90 days without doing a stability study. So,
and Anthony, let me just jump in there real quick, because I think I've had people certainly at our vertical vet members say, well, why don't they just do the testing on all these drugs and get it up to these maximum days? It's expensive and time consuming. Kind of just very briefly tell us how much this costs to actually get this test done.
Yeah, stability study would generally, I mean, again, it depends on how many items you're trying to test in the same study, but generally you're looking at between $45,000 to $50,000 per item or per test. So again, if we wanted to test methimazole suspension to extend the date to 180 days, that's about the cost it would take. And we have to wait the full 180 days to collect that data, or actually a little bit more than 180 days to collect that data to be able to then assign that date. So it's very long, very expensive process to do those studies.
Yeah. And then, of course, prednisolone acetate, which is going to fall under the sterile 797 guidelines. Talk about that. That really took a hit.
Yeah, and that's, again, back to the sterile standards. They got really squashed. I mean, if again, previously we could assign a 240-day beyond use date to that. Now, without any testing, you could do maybe 4 to 14 days. At room temperature. If you do a stability study, you can take it out to 90 days. But again, even if your stability study that you do says that it's stable for longer than 90 days, it doesn't matter. We're locked into a maximum of 90 days.
Right. And Anthony, we've already got one comment, and this is something, guys, that we're all faced with. It's they're saying, look, it's so short dated. This makes it more expensive for my clients. And yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's one of the biggest, sort of consequences of this kind of legislation, and it's costing the consumer, in our case, the pet owning public, more money for this. Now, we did mention briefly earlier, there's another category of drug production, this 503B. Maybe walk us through that, because drugs like tacrolimus, an ophthalmic drug, many of us are familiar with using it for dry eye, KCS, and so forth. Talk to us briefly about that.
Sure. I mean, so to go back to the beginning, the USP standards on compounding are only applicable to state licensed pharmacies, or commonly referred to as 503A pharmacies. A 503B outsourcing facility is a category of drug producer that is sort of in between a state licensed compounding pharmacy and a drug manufacturer. So those entities are regulated by the FDA. They have to follow the same CGMP standards that a drug manufacturer would have to follow. And so the USP standards aren't applicable to those facilities. CGMP standards or FDA standards are applicable to those facilities. So all of the limitations and restrictions of the USP don't apply to a facility that's a 503B outsourcing facility.
So you can get those longer dates. And again, this is just a higher order of production. I mean, it's just it's like a big pharma production, right? We do have a quick question that I think is applicable right here. It says, why is it that other 503B pharmacies have the same products like cyclosporin, but yet they've got a year BUD? How is that happening, Anthony?
Well, again, it's a 503B facility. So in a 503B facility, you establish your beyond use date according to FDA, guidance or regulation, if you will, standards. So a 503B can't make up a 270 days, or they have to do stability studies as well. But again, they can use the actual data from their stability study for however long they do the study and however long the data is good to assign an expiration date or beyond use date to their product. So if they've got data that says this product is stable for a year, then they can assign a 1 year beyond use date to that product.
Yeah. And Anthony, it's even more convoluted because, guys, there's considerable question over who has a legal authority in some of these cases. I mean, you got the state pharmacy, you've got the FDA. I mean, Anthony, there's a lot of folks vying for this oversight. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, it's relatively clear on the human health side. On the veterinary health side, it is still not very clear.
Right. So again, a lot of questions, but again, it's impacting us in the clinics with our patients. It's raising costs. It's making drugs more difficult to access. It's making it difficult to maintain an inventory. I mean, Anthony, I can tell you, man, it's painful out here. It's painful out here. So let's kind of, I do want to just quickly, before we get to some of these other good questions, let's talk a little bit about some of your specific BUDs and maybe why that's important.
Yeah, we went through a process when we knew the changes were coming. We went through a process of really proactively identifying, okay, which of our compounds are going to be most needed to have an extended BUD from a clinical perspective and from a patient access perspective. And so, we went through the process of spending millions of dollars to conduct and have those products go through stability studies. So what you're seeing here is really kind of a list of some of our more popular medications that we feel it's necessary to have an extended or longer beyond use date. And you can see the USP standard, beyond use date for some of these would be between 14 and 35 days. But because we've conducted stability studies, we got those out to, 120, 180 days. On the sterile side, again, you can see things that are between 45 and 60 days following the USP standard. Again, with the investment into stability studies, we've got those out to the max that we're allowed to assign, even with stability studies, between 90 and 120 days.
Right. And again, guys, if you're like me, you're still going, oh my gosh, this is stunning. Just last year we had more than double the amount of time, and now suddenly it's gone. And and again, it's just, this is sort of, we have a question. Anthony says, what can we do about it? I mean, well, maybe I'll let you take a crack at that.
Well, we're still looking at that. As some of you may know, I mean, these standards started being worked on in 2012. They came out in draft form for comment in 2016. Wedgwood was certainly involved in commenting and providing feedback and saying, hey, these don't work. USP went back to the table, came back with another draft, I believe in 2019 or 2018. We commented again there. And then when they issued their final chapter, we were part of a group that actually appealed it. There's a process for USP to appeal these standards. And we won the appeal, meaning that, USP said it had to go back again and take a look at these standards. And so we did ultimately make a little bit of movement. Originally, on the sterile side, there was no ability to do stability studies to extend to what we have now. There was only the 45-day or 60-day, that was it. So moving forward, what can we do? I think what we have to get organized around this, but I think the best thing to do is really start gathering data around what the impacts of these dates are on patient access, patient treatment, and really gather that data and then submit that to USP in a way that is, let's make a change to these chapters. We're not going to appeal the chapter. They're already in effect. But again, USP has a mechanism by which you can suggest changes. And I think we provided a lot of data and a lot of information during the appeal and our comment period, but it apparently wasn't enough. So I think we need to get really some real life examples, some real life data showing that hey, this is not working for the industry. Let's get that data and submit it to USP and see if that moves the needle to make any changes.
Yep. And there are mechanisms that we as veterinarians can make our voice heard. We'll have some links at the end of this presentation, a simple QR code, grab your phone and take a snap of that, because there are ways for us to be heard. And again, I'm still, skeptical and not very thrilled with some of the changes that are happening, but, we have to keep fighting for it. A lot of specific questions, too, that were kind of popping up. And I want to get to those in just a little bit. I do want to kind of just briefly, kind of talk about the impact. And Anthony, for me as a veterinarian, as a practice owner, as someone also, who has a GPO, vertical vet, this is really affecting how our practices stock these drugs. I mean, the GFI 256, changed a lot of this and how we can prescribe different things for in-clinic use. And then suddenly now, wow, when we can get it in clinic, we've got 14 days or 28 days, which just makes a nightmare for a lot of us. I do agree with the original poster here tonight, Anthony, that cost has become a real issue for many of our clients, for sure, because, let's just be honest, Anthony. If I'm having to dispense a 14-day supply of something, just the economics of it aren't as cheap as giving a 90-day. So it really is frustrating. It also requires us to do a lot more work. Guys, I was fortunate enough to go and speak to several Congress people and on the Hill in January about this issue. And I really tried to impress upon them, guys, it's not just a legislation. This now requires about 4 or 5 people that I have to pay as a small business owner just to adhere to your new requirements. And guys, it's a lot of work. I'm sure if you're out there in the trenches, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And the more frequent refills, even, Anthony, I know I had a couple of legislators say, well, but with all the online ordering, guys, a lot of America is not able to get stuff the next day. I live in a very rural part of North Carolina where, our next day is 2 or 3 days. And so, when you start to magnify that all over the country, I think that these are real issues. They're real pressing issues for sure. And again, Anthony, what are you guys doing? Now, I know that you're continuing to fight legislatively, but what are you guys doing to sort of help us out?
Yeah, well, I think again, Dr. Ward, some of those same economic impacts that veterinarians are experiencing, we're experiencing as well as pharmacists, right? We have to take more orders for the same number of patients and the same volume of medication. We have to make smaller, more frequent batches because of this. So some of those same economic impacts we're trying to manage through as well. One of the things that we can do is, and we are doing, is try to improve our capacity, right? So again, it's a different dynamic now. We're taking more orders more frequently. We're making more batches more frequently. So setting up our facility from both the space standpoint and from a staffing standpoint to be able to manage through that is one of the things, that we're doing. The other thing that we're doing is really trying to, as best as we can, and we've always done this, but we're working even harder at doing this, is making items in advance, right? You certainly don't want to, with the short dating that's happening here, as a veterinarian, if you prescribe something, you don't want to wait several days for it to be made and then have a very short date that you can use, right? So what we're really doing, working very hard, is to try and forecast and plan different items, when they can be made, when we should have them in stock, so that when you place your order, we're pulling it from existing inventory, if you will. But again, we have to balance that because our dating can't be too long, so we can't have stuff on the shelf that's going to be expired in 10 days because that's not going to do you any good. And one of the bigger things, as we've discussed earlier too, is in Wedgwood's case anyway, we're expanding our 503B product offering, if you will. Right. So we have a 503B outsourcing facility that's been up and running in San Jose for a couple of years. And we have just acquired and are getting online a second 503B facility in Albany, Ohio. So, we're really trying to get these facilities up and running, increase their capacity, shift some of the medications that are were typically made in the 503A pharmacies to the outsourcing facilities, so that we can, extend the dating and make larger amounts. And again, just have these things available at the time that the veterinarians need them.
Yeah, and guys, just so you know, I saw a presentation by Wedgwood at AVMA, and they showed that about 88% of the compounding medications were shipped the same day or within one day. And I thought that's just remarkable because that's we need it because we got short dates on this. Anthony, a couple of quick questions generally before we get to some of these specifics. And guys, keep them coming. We got some fantastic questions, so stick around I think some of these questions are really great. How do they find out what the BUD of a compounded drug is?
Well, there's a couple different ways. I mean, obviously, once you get the medication, you go look in the label, right? But what we do at Wedgwood, and what I would assume most compounders would do is, whether you're going online to place the order, whether you're calling in to place the order, we have the ability to. You can ask right then and there, hey, I want XYZ medication. What is the BUD that's assigned to that medication? So, if it's something that's typically assigned a 90-day BUD or a 60-day BUD, we can tell you at the time, or you can see at the time that you're looking that item up and placing that order.
Yeah, and guys, you really need to pay attention to this. Be vigilant when you're ordering these drugs because, quite frankly, not everybody is being as transparent, and you could show up at your clinic or the client's door, with like 5 days left or something like that. Again, I know we've covered this, but just why is it so much shorter now? I mean, we touched on it, but just recap it.
It's really just that the standard USP standards have put in place some really awful restrictions, at least on the sterile side, that kind of have our hands tied.
Yeah. And again, guys, the science just really didn't support all these decisions. And, I was kind of shocked as I started getting involved with this issue a year and a half ago. Again, we're making some decisions that are well-intentioned, but not backed by data. And I think we got to do better. Again, briefly, how do you determine the BUDs? Like as a pharmacist, like, you mentioned some studies, but just quickly recap that.
Yeah, again, I think the ability for a pharmacist to actually use their professional judgment and experience has diminished with the new standards. Today, either we follow what's prescribed in the USP chapter or we put the product into a stability study. And what a stability study, I mean, there's a multitude of things that are tested in the stability study. It's not just the potency, it's a lot of different things. It's the container closure. There's a lot of different things that go into the stability study. And so once we get that data back, we evaluate those results, and then that's basically what the pharmacists do. Based on those results, what's the longest date that we can assign? Prior to the new standards, I mean, again, not that it really matters much, but the pharmacists were able to understand, based on their understanding of the chemistry of the ingredients they were using, of the degradation characteristics, and again, maybe even utilizing some external studies or published research that they could find, they could formulate a very valid beyond use state based on all of that, and kind of using their knowledge and skill. We can still use stability studies that are published. We don't have to necessarily test all of ours, but the restriction there is it has to be the exact same formula that we're using. So it's very infrequent that we're able to find those.
Yeah, it's complicated, guys. Again, how does this mean? What does this mean for how I order and prescribe? I'll take this one real quick. It just means that we're going to have to pay more attention. We're going to have to be mindful of these shorter BUDs. That may change the way we prescribe different drugs. And ultimately, it's just going to be, I hate to say this, guys, but it's an increased inconvenience and cost for everyone. So that's really where, as a small business, advocate, that's where I have a problem. Guys, here's that QR code I promised you. Please take a picture of this. Just get out your phone, whatever, snap it right now, because there's a ton of resources that Wedgwood has spent a lot of time kind of explaining this issue much better than we could tonight. Anthony, while we've got you here, we've got a load of great questions. So if you don't mind, I'd like to get your opinion on a couple of them. Will more drugs continue to be tested to extend a BUD? So tell me what you guys, any advice on, what can we expect?
Yeah, I mean, we have a team that continually evaluates, again, the offerings that we have and the items that we have. And again, it's really based on, unfortunately, like anything else, if there's an item that we're only compounding and selling, 3 times a year, that's certainly not something we're going to spend $45,000 or $50,000 on testing, right? So there's a team that is continually evaluating the number of times certain items are ordered, and also really doing, I think, some market research and understanding, okay, where are the veterinarians experiencing the most pain, like with what types of products? And one of the things that we're really trying to do as best as we can, and this is again not to second guess or override the judgment of any of the veterinarians, is is provide them options. If you're asking for or want to prescribe a certain medication, and we've got something, maybe a different dosage form, or we've got a different flavor, or something that we know has been stability studied and can give you a longer date, then our pharmacists are really trying to provide those as options. Again, the veterinarian is the ultimate decider, but we want to make sure that you all know, hey, there might be some other options. If the beyond use state is really an issue, there might be some other options that could work for this patient other than what you're initially, wanting to prescribe.
Right. Anthony, a lot of questions, and I'll be honest with you guys. We gave live presentation of this at VMX and at Western this year, and we got these same types of questions, and these are from the wildlife and zoo colleagues, and they're very frustrated. I mean, they've been hammered with these drugs. And a lot of questions are saying, well, why don't you have them in the 503B? When are you going to put them to the 503B? I mean, this sort of is similar to the answer about equine medications. Maybe touch on, we feel your pain, but I mean, this is not just, you can't just snap your fingers and roll it over to a 503B.
Yeah, there's a few things. I mean, they're in process, right? But there's a few limiting factors. One is just the capacity of the 503B, and we've got one 503B. We are rapidly trying to get online a second 503B, and so that'll more than double our capacity, right? The second piece of that is, again, with anything that's coming out of a 503B facility, there is the same stability studies, if not more robust stability studies, that have to happen. So, could we launch an equine product today that has stability studies out to 30 days and give it a 30-day beyond use state? We could, maybe, but I don't know what value that would add, right? We want to wait until we have, at least 180 days, maybe a little bit longer. And again, these are real-time tests. So we have to wait that 180 days or 270 days, and again, maybe a little bit longer, depending on how long it takes this data to come back, to be able to assign that item that date. So all I can say is just be patient, because we are working on getting those things through that pipeline, through those studies, to be able to launch those as quickly as we can, again, with a usable beyond use state.
Right. And guys, the former CEO of Wedgwood, Marcy Bliss, and myself knocked on doors at Congress. We sat in every meeting we could. We actually gave a congressional briefing on this issue, and I brought up repeatedly the demands of equine and zoo and wildlife, exotic animal medicine. And if I were you tonight and I was a wildlife, zoo, equine practitioner, and you're really getting hammered on this issue, you need to go and say, how can I have my voice heard? Because, I can knock on doors. Marcy knocks on doors. Wedgwood knocks on doors. But, we need a bunch of people knocking on those doors, so to speak. And they do listen, but it just takes time. And, really, we're now playing for, 2025 without a doubt. A couple other quick questions here. Okay, this is a good one. What would cause a medication that was previously a 503B compound be changed back recently to a very short BUD? So that's a bit of you might want to explain that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that might do that. Again, with an outsourcing facility, you have to follow CGMP. So it's very similar to, again, a drug manufacturer. So there could be a number of factors. It could be the supplier of the raw material that has been qualified is no longer providing the material for the 503B. It could be that there are, I'm trying to think of some other. There could be a validation step that needs to be done. That is, there's something about the process that is unclear. It could be a couple of different reasons, but mostly it would be likely related to a raw material or some other standard that again, as a CGMP facility, we're temporarily unable to meet, and therefore we have to ship the product back to the 503A or state licensed pharmacy. Because again, the 503A pharmacies, while we're kind of stuck with the USP standards, we also have a little bit more flexibility than an outsourcing facility in terms of not having to meet CGMP standards. So if we need to shift a supplier of raw material, that's much easier to do in a 503A and much quicker to do in a 503A pharmacy than it is in a 503B pharmacy. So some of those, that could be some of the reasons why we're seeing a shift. Those shifts would be temporary, right? They're not permanent shifts. They're temporary shifts to be able to continue to offer the item until the 503B can get back online to be able to offer it again.
Yeah. And again, a lot of questions. Who do we contact to get our voices heard? Guys, honestly, this is at a state pharmacy board level for most of this issue right now. And I would say that's up for debate. Some states are actually, not adhering to certain tenets of this. So, I mean, guys, it's very complicated, but I would definitely start there. When we had the GFI, we were leading the charge at a federal level. We had a great, portal with the FDA to make our complaints and our suggestions and comments and so forth. And so, we certainly utilized that. I mean, I wrote several letters. Somebody's suggesting AAP. We have a board member who is the past president of AAP on Wedgwood Advisory Board. So, guys, wet doors, we're knocking on that door as well, and it's not always as open as you might think. Again, let's see if there's any other questions. Here's one from Jack Mortensen. It says, approximately what % of marketed drugs compounded by Wedgwood have data to support BUDs currently? And I know that's a kind of a mess, but can you answer that at all?
I honestly will have to get back to you. I don't have a number. I can tell you that again, it depends. If we're talking about our top selling items, they are the top 20% of our items. I would say probably 50% of those have stability studies at least. But that's just, I mean, we'll have to get back to Jack on an exact number.
Yeah, and Jack, honestly, it really boils down to what drug you need and when, because I tell people it's like it depends. Again, a couple of quick questions, and if we didn't get to your question live, the good folks at Wedgwood will definitely be reaching out and answering, because a lot of these are specific, about formulations and so forth. And again, a lot of wildlife questions about, hey, give me better BUDs for these wildlife drugs, and I feel you. But kind of the last one here, unless I hear from the Wedgwood folks, we have some more. Will you ever make injectable drugs such as apomorphine, buprenorphine, and so forth in smaller vials where we can order multiple to provide longer than after the 28-day injection? I lost the last part there, but did that make sense to you?
I think it does. I think what they're referring to, the question is referring to once we have to label our items, our sterile items. Once you open it or begin to use it, there's a certain amount of days that you're allowed to use it. So that is definitely something that we have looked into, and I think that's a great question for us to send over to our marketing team and our product development team to see, hey, is that particular drug worthy of that? I mean, from our standpoint, it's not that big of a deal to provide smaller volumes of some of these compounds. The only downside of that could be, and I don't know this particular item, but if we've conducted a stability study of that product and we haven't conducted the stability study on that smaller pack size, then we're stuck with either a very short beyond use date until we've put that pack size through the stability study.
And again, guys, you have to do for each of those formulations, they have to do the corresponding studies. So I mean, it's not just we've got methimazole and you can then apply it. It's like, wait, you have 5 milligram in this aqueous solution or whatever, right? I mean, it's very specific, and that's where the cost really racks up quickly. A couple of good questions here as we leave you guys tonight. And again, we appreciate it. When does the beyond use date begin? This is one we've gotten a lot in our live presentations.
So the beyond use date begins when we actually compound a medication, when we take these ingredients and we're at the counter and we start mixing them together. That's when it begins. It doesn't begin, and trust me, we've looked at every different way of trying to have it begin at a later point in time, but no, that's when it starts.
Yep. And you can see, guys, how impractical that 14-day BUD is. And I remember talking to one congressman, and I was trying to explain this concept because they had the same idea that I think one of our questions had, was like, well, it starts when you open the carton of milk, right? And it's like, no, it's when the milk went in the carton. Actually, even before that, it's when it was being homogenized. So, it's really interesting. What about the AVMA advocate? You should probably look at their own statement on this issue. You might be disappointed. I'll leave that one right there. But it has been a struggle. And, going back to the GFI 256, when we asked, the FDA approached the AVMA to give them a list of drugs that we needed in clinic use, and they came back and gave them 11. Thankfully, Wedgwood stepped up and folks like us at Vertical Vet, we started really, making that comment. We got the GFI extended, and then we got over 200 drugs, I think, to date, roughly. And then the final question for tonight, we'll go ahead and read it. It's a long, it's a good one, though. How have these regulations and changes made it so we can no longer order certain things for in-house use? I think I just mentioned this. Example, compounded metronidazole can no longer be ordered for in-clinic use. This gets back to my dear friend, GFI 256. I don't know if you want to give that quick little summary of why you can't get stuff for your in-clinic use anymore.
Yeah, I don't know how quick I can make this, but really it has nothing to do with the USP standards. The USP
Not at all.
Are about the product and the dating and the standards. The GFI is all about how we can provide the product to the veterinarians. And so, GFI has created a framework by which only FDA can approve items for essentially in-house or office use. And as you said, Dr. Ward, many of us have submitted not a lot of nominees, and initially FDA was moving pretty quickly in evaluating some of those nominees. But if the answer is no, then the answer is no for now. We're not giving up. We have to come back and look and see is there more data we can provide to FDA. But that's related to GFI and the restrictions that are in place because of that.
Yeah. And guys, again, as veterinarians, these things just happened simultaneously. It kind of created this whole cascade of events that left us all shaking our head and going, wait, what just happened here? So if you're new to this issue, don't worry. I mean, this is something that, is just sort of just evolving. I encourage you to find out more. I encourage you, especially if you're in one of those practice areas that's greatly affected, such as wildlife, zoo medicine, equine, and so forth, where these are very expensive to get these drugs tested, you definitely want to reach out to your state boards of pharmacy and let them know, because I do believe that especially at a state level, they're more responsive. They just don't know what the issues are until we bring them. Again, I want to thank Wedgwood for sponsoring this content tonight. It's a wonderful discussion to have. I got to thank Dr. Grzib for helping us out from the Wedgwood side. And again, as always, I'm Dr. Ernie Ward, and it's been my real pleasure. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate. The good folks at Wedgwood will help you out. You guys have a great night. Talk to you soon. Bye.